Hello, everyone. Is this good here? All right. Welcome to ACG's featured session on managing cyber risks. My name is Vicki Fox. I'm a managing director at Eisen Fox, which is a boutique investment bank in Milwaukee, and I'm also on the ACG Wisconsin Board of Directors. Today I have the honor of introducing our three panelists on a topic that just keeps growing in importance and in ways that our industry often doesn't think about or expect. These expert panelists will offer up some key strategies on how to address cybersecurity concerns that affect the deal-making process directly. With us today are Justin Daniels, shareholder with Baker Donelson. Justin's corporate practice consists of representing domestic and international technology businesses and business owners in all aspects of their growth cycle. Igor Rosenblit, partner with Iron Road Partners, is also with us. Igor's unique combination of investing experience, due diligence expertise, and decades of service as the SEC's primary private markets expert allows him to provide insightful and practical guidance to clients grappling with complex regulatory and operational issues. And last but not least, we have Bhavesh Vadani, a principal with CohnReznick. Bhavesh has over 20 years of experience in the field of information risk management, security consulting, and private advisory services. The three panelists will be offering their expertise in middle markets legal, operational, and regulatory issues related to cybersecurity. There will be time for Q&A afterwards, but please join me in welcoming our three panelists.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending our session. And I thought maybe a great way to introduce our topic is, I was walking around today, and I'm sure a lot of you are trying to juggle your deal work with your networking. And I wonder how many of you have stopped to think of, hey, I had to connect to the public Wi-Fi here and work on my deals. I get better speed with my computer, and to just stop to think and say, how might public Wi-Fi connected to my phone or my computer make my deal a little bit insecure? Just want you to ponder that. And so I want to turn to our esteemed panel today and talk a little bit about how are you seeing some of the threats evolve in the cyberspace when we talk about M&A transactions and a lot of the deal work that our audience does.
Sure. From our perspective, so we serve larger and middle market managers from a compliance standpoint. And when I was at the commission 5 or 6 years ago, it would be regular practice for managers to get phishing emails and for managers to get ransomware. And the threat landscape has just evolved. And the regulators evolved with the threat landscape. The SEC now has a unit in the Division of Enforcement focused on investigating cybersecurity breaches, and not just cybersecurity breaches at managers, but also cybersecurity breaches at portfolio companies. And so you run the risk as a manager of not only falling prey to some of the cybersecurity bad actors, but to pour salt in the wound, you then run the risk of, at the same time, being subject to an enforcement investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission. And there are lots of kind of hooks and approaches that the Commission uses with that. And at the same time, I think investors have evolved their view of the threat landscape. And I think the important thing to say there is that it's worth noting, and we work a lot with investors, it's worth noting that investors are willing to pay for good cybersecurity hygiene at their portfolio companies and occasionally at their managers as well. I would anticipate, as I'm sure all of you would as well, that this situation is only going to get more intense, not less, as time moves forward.
Yeah, and if I may just step back, right? I mean, why are we talking about cybersecurity now? Right? I mean, it's because we have evolved as a business. I mean, if you talk about cybersecurity, and I started my career in the late 90s, and I still joke about it, when the only two sectors that cared about back then information security was financial services, the large financial institutions, and the DoD. Not even our civilian agencies cared about information security. Why? Because information was not relevant or as relevant. Today, information is currency in the business world, right? And the reason for that is because we are a connected economy. The word cyber actually means connected. That's why information security became cybersecurity, is because we are a connected ecosystem. How many of you in this room today, to Justin's point, are trying to make deals on the fly while using your laptops, your assets, your phones? Why? It's because you're connected with applications, with software assets, with your clients, with your prospects, with your investors at a speed of light. What does that do? That has now become a risk to a business. So cybersecurity has evolved, it's become a business risk. And as businesses are evolving, the risk and the threat landscape evolving, regulators are paying attention to it. And that's why they are coming out with regulations to protect the businesses, because frankly, right now, it's very hard to keep up with the evolving threat landscape. And it's not just for the investment advisors, the fund advisors, the fund managers, the PE firms, the independent sponsors, it's even for the large organizations, because systems evolve, hence risks evolve, threats evolve, businesses evolve. We need to stay up to date with that, and we are far behind. So that's why we are where we are today, and cyber is a big issue, is because we are a connected economy, we want results right away, but we are not upgrading our operations, our infrastructure, our view, or maturing it to a point where we can sustain that growth and success.
And just to add one more thing about the regulator, so I served for 11 years at the Commission. I think I served under 7 different chairs, and the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and then the Biden administration. As you would expect, the Democrats and Republicans agree on almost nothing except for one thing, and that is that cybersecurity is an important thing to invest in as a regulator. And so no matter what happens in the future, I would expect that the SEC would continue to invest in cybersecurity expertise, and by the way, both in their own expertise to protect themselves and also to make sure that the registrant population is protected. And I think that just will, no matter what, will ratchet up the pressure on managers.
So another thing I wanted to talk about, and is another good question for the audience, is it seems one of the challenges you have with cybersecurity is, in a word, it's inconvenient. So how many in the audience today do you use multi-factor authentication for all your banking websites, all your other important websites? And I wanted, if our panelists could talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you see on deals to really look at cybersecurity when it impacts ROI. You might have to spend money on it. You have to spend time doing the due diligence. A lot of that is inconvenient when the cadence of the business deal is, we're getting this done in the next 30 days, and that's the way it's going to be.
Well, not only is it inconvenient, it's amorphous. So it's unclear if you invest X amount of dollars in your cybersecurity. It's really unclear whether or not you're going to stop the next cybersecurity threat on your portfolio company. But I don't think that's really the right way to look at it. I mean, as a private equity manager, you have a fiduciary duty to your clients to do what you can to protect their investments. And that is a duty that you should take seriously, regulators take seriously, and I know your investors take seriously. And even if you can't stop the next threat, you need to do probably something a little bit more than just the minimum to make sure that you can prevent it. And I think at some level that becomes existential for you as a manager, doing the right thing even when the result is not always assured.
I mean, I'll just ask each one of you here, how many of you have home security alarms and security system? Yeah? Why do you have them? Aren't you in a neighborhood that you feel safe? Anybody? Yeah, why do we, I'm assuming a lot here, have life insurance policies? Don't you all keep up with your health and go to doctors and all? And the point I'm trying to make is, at the end of the day, we all view things that are important to us, and that's where cyber is going. Cyber is important to the business community. We cannot view it as an expense item. It is more of an item that you need to expend dollars to make your business better, because your business depends on that, right? I was having a conversation with the CEO of a mid-market company, about $550 million in revenue, and the same conversation happened. And my basic question to them was, okay, you have revenue growth, you are in a particular industry which positions yourself to having 20% growth over 5 years. Let me ask you this question, where is that growth coming from? And he went along to say about his business model, and my one question was, do you know what data do you have in your environment today? Are you 100% confident about that? Because he was telling me that he feels that they've invested enough on the security of his environment. And I asked one question, I'm like, do you know what data do you have in your environment today with reasonable assurance? And give me the percentage. His percentage answer to me was, Bhavesh, if I was honest with you, I don't have an understanding of even 50% of my data in my environment. If you don't have an understanding of the data you use for your business in your environment, what data protection strategies or cybersecurity strategies did you even employ that you feel confident is going to protect you from a breach? And the point of this is, and Justin, you can chime in here from a legal perspective, the point of this is, we are doing business on a regular basis where information is shared on a regular basis at a speed of light with the transactional diligence process that we all go through. At the end of the day, that information is what allows you to do the business. And if you cannot protect that information reasonably with having good, adequate controls or protocols in place, you're always going to have an uphill battle. You're always going to fight it. Now, to Igor's point, how much is enough? And unfortunately, that's the point that even the federal agencies and some of the regulators are trying to figure out, is there a formula? And unfortunately, there is none. Because again, cyber is very relatively new. If you go to an underwriter for life insurance policy, they'll tell you, yes, I have enough data to say, you know what, life expectancy is going to be up to 90 years, right? And in that, I'm going to give you, through my actuarial services, I'm going to give you this percentage. Cyber is relatively new, but I can tell you this, in the next 10 years, you will have that data where you will have an understanding of what percentage should I invest that will give me enough protection.
I want to try and answer the how much is enough question, and then I have a question for you. The way the regulators view it is that they view everything through the lens of hindsight. And so if you have any sort of breach, the regulator will show up and say, well, you obviously didn't do the right thing because you had this breach, and whatever countermeasures could have been deployed to prevent this breach, you didn't deploy them. And you will be in a position to defend yourself and explain why what you had was reasonable. And so when you're thinking about what you're going to do, and this is kind of how we advise our clients on everything, think about sitting across the table from a regulator and say, yes, I had an issue, but look at all the other things that I did. Mm-hmm. And I guess my question to Bhavesh and Justin is, if you had a limited amount of capital and a limited amount of time, where's the best bang for your buck to invest in for private equity managers for cyber?
Justin, do you want to go first?
So, interestingly enough, even though I'm an M&A lawyer by trade, I've handled multiple ransomware and data breach engagements for different private equity funds. So my view of it is from a more tactical point of view, it should be table stakes now that everyone in the organization uses multi-factor authentication. While it is not a cure-all, the cost to upgrade to a Microsoft license that allows it is minimal, and you get a lot better protection. The other one, more on a business strategy end, another question for the audience is, do you have someone at each of your portfolio companies who is solely responsible for security? Because when the IT person is also responsible for security, that means you have no security, because the last 2 or 3 ransomware events that I've handled were basically, the root cause of it was somebody was working remotely who had domain administrative level credentials, and they didn't have multi-factor authentication. Why was that? Because we moved so quickly to the remote workforce, and the IT person was in charge, and they had a laundry list of stuff to do to keep things going, keep people working, keep the revenue coming in. And that thing about, oh, that multi-factor authentication, well, it got put way down the list until the threat actor got in and they encrypted the whole network. So in my view, multi-factor is the #1 tactical thing, but just from an overall security standpoint, you need to start with someone who is going to be the owner of security, and that's what they do, because again, IT and security are always going to be at loggerheads because one is concerned about security and the other one's concerned about efficiency.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, right? I mean, I tell my clients, don't boil the ocean. You don't need to. Start with the basics of security. Multi-factor is one of them. Don't allow access to information where it's not allowed. Yes, it's an inconvenient to go to 10 different folders or create access. Spend the time, understand where your crown jewels are. You know your business best, right? Nobody can tell you your business better than you can. So if you know your business best, you should know what are your most critical assets, or you can call it crown jewel, or however you want to term it. And you make sure that you are protecting those assets with everything you've got, including the term that you'll hear from a security perspective is defense in depth. No different than any other term such as risk management, where you're trying to rely upon multiple stages of defense so that you're protecting your assets. But the key is that's where you should invest the dollars. And in today's day and age, technology has actually become much more available, and it's become a lot more cost effective. So when PE firms or even actually target companies, portfolio companies, if you're thinking about it, there are plenty of options available to you, whether it's cloud-based or SaaS platform, that you can take advantage of for a relatively low cost and a lot more protection, right? Including Microsoft. Microsoft is a gigantic firm, but Microsoft has come out with small to mid-sized business cloud offerings, especially for this, so that they can extend the security features. And because Microsoft has so much buying power, you can take advantage of it and say, yeah, you know what? I can rely upon the security of Microsoft, because if Microsoft is doing it, which has so many clients across different industry verticals and size, I can take comfort in it. So there are avenues available. It's a matter of thinking about it, right? So where would you spend dollars? Make sure that you have the right IT cloud solution, right? For PE firms, that's the way to go. Make sure you have a security governance structure in place, to Justin's point, somebody who owns security, not somebody who's doing part-time. And tactically do the basic things: multi-factor authentication, access control. Do not give access to everybody and anybody. And have a resiliency plan. Oftentimes, PE firms will come to me and say, that's just a documented plan. No, it's not, because it's not a matter of if you are hacked, it's when you will know you were hacked, right? And at that point, you need to get your operations back up. And the only way to do it is with that resiliency plan, incident response plan, or the recovery plan, because people will know exactly what they need to do.
And I will add one more, and this is, has to do with how the federal securities laws are structured. Pretty much every large SEC cyber enforcement case had to do with a failure of incident response. Just from a regulatory perspective, having good incident response policies, especially as they concern evaluating whether or not you need to inform your investors, I think it would be money well spent.
So Justin, let me ask you this question, right? I mean, one of the things that we were talking about while we were preparing for the panel is, PE firms care about diligence, right? You have a certain period of time and you need to get the diligence activities done so that you can go to closing. What are, being an M&A lawyer, and from your perspective, what are some of the steps you would ask a PE firm to do as part of the diligence process so that they at least have some comfort with their cybersecurity of the portfolio companies?
So when I've worked with PE companies, usually after there's been an incident with a portfolio company, things tend to change. But I look at this process as a 3-layer chocolate cake. If you do these things, you get the cherry on top, which is the ROI on your investment. So what is that 3-layer chocolate cake? Number one is, what are the type of questions that you're asking? And for me, it starts with 3 questions. I might say, hey, Bhavesh, can you provide me a schematic of your network that shows me the assets that are on your network? And hey, how does data flow through your network so I know where the data is? The second thing I might ask you is, what is your information security plan written? And then how does cybersecurity report up to the board so they find out about these things? And what do you think the answer is if I said to all of you, hey, I would like to bring my third-party diligence team and get on your network and we're going to look around? What's the answer going to be? No. The answer is not no, it's hell no. So then what kind of questions are you asking? And then what are you building into your reps and warranties? Because what is the average amount of time that a threat actor is in your network before they engage in their mayhem? Anybody know? about 270 days. So think about security being a fundamental rep and some of the other different ways you have to look at cyber. And then last but not least, and this kind of builds upon the past session about integration, from our opinion, from a cybersecurity point of view, resist the temptation to go and integrate your network, because once you have the network, now you can send your security people in, because the moment you as a PE group connect your network to the portco, even for financial reporting, now you have a connection. So what does that mean if there's an undetected intrusion? They can simply move across onto your network, and if you don't believe me, we can ask Marriott. That's exactly what happened when they merged with Starwood. So that's my kind of 3-layer chocolate cake approach to that problem.
I think for the SEC, it really comes down to, at least from a regulatory perspective, it comes down to disclosure to investors. And I guess in terms of the questions you would ask before kind of engaging, at least the questions the Commission is going to ask right now before kind of engaging in any sort of investigation is, what did you tell your investors you were going to do from a cyber perspective and a due diligence perspective when you sold them your fund? And did you actually do those things? With extended fundraising times and with multiple people fundraising, it's more difficult than you think to figure out exactly what your investors were told about cyber, connect it to what you're actually doing about cyber right now, and to take any remedial action. But I think that's really worthwhile, because the delta between what you told your investors and what you did is the primary legal hook that the SEC will use to investigate you. And if you take a step back and just spend a little bit of time identifying your disclosures and identifying your practices, it might actually not take as long as you think.
I mean, one of the things that we do a lot of cyber and IT diligence, right? And the basic premise of this, again, goes back to no business today can do business without the backbone of IT, right? You need IT applications, you need IT systems. Even for your quality of earnings, you rely upon a system that's generating a report so that you can reconcile that or have some assurances on that. How do you know that data is accurate and complete to begin with, or is reliable? Because guess what? That IT system can be fudged with all the back-end numbers. All of you remember Enron, don't you? That's how Enron came down. It's because the CFO and the controller were fudging the numbers. They were over-reporting the numbers on many cases, right? Why do you think that doesn't happen right now in the portfolio companies? Yes, you have reps warranties. Yes, you have certain disclosures that you put out there and you protect yourself. But the point of this is, it's very important in the diligence process to ask some of those tough questions and use that as part of your assessment, whether you want to move forward with the deal and then protect yourself. I have 2 examples I can share with you, and I cannot disclose the names, but we actually helped a very large PE firm go through a transaction that they were about to make, and we actually found through the diligence activity that the portfolio company was breached 3 years back. And they had no idea, the target company that they were acquiring, that this company was breached and their data was on the dark web for sale. And we were able to go back to 3 years of record we purchased from the dark web, from the perpetrators, and we proved it that your data was on this particular platform at this particular time with the screenshots. That basically opened the eyes for the PE firms to say, yeah, we could have inherited a big liability because there was consumer data in it. Social security numbers. So the company now protects itself by having an escrow account and putting aside a percentage of dollar there to protect themselves in the event if that breach that happened 3 years back is going to be some kind of a legal liability on them. Now, if we hadn't done that, or if they were not prudent enough to say, no, we want you to do a proper diligence on this, we wouldn't have found it. That's one example. And the other example is very similar to, this is not the Marriott, it's a similar example of Marriott where portfolio company, the PE firm acquired the target company, they had a bolt-on added to that they acquired, and they wanted to integrate Guess what happened? The Bolton was breached 18 months, I think, if I remember correctly. And that just connected a pipeline of reporting into now the target company and eventually into the PE firm. And that malware has actually traversed it back into the PE firm. Just nothing but by an API, which is essentially an integration between the three networks.
Hence, resist your temptation to quickly integrate the network, because that is literally your last line of defense. Because once you have that connection established and they've been in the network, now they move laterally onto your network. And I've seen cases where you've acquired a company, maybe the bolt-on was $3 million, but then the ransomware engagement is $10 to $15 million, and going back out against the seller doesn't solve it. And then, of course, you have the reputational issues, because all of us in here, as well as being with a PE firm or whatnot, we're all consumers. Mm-hmm. And so we're all aware of certain companies out there and certain industries now that have gotten really bad reputations over how they treat our data as well as the security that surrounds it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reason why SEC just proposed a cybersecurity disclosure rule that if it actually passes, it's going to require fund managers to disclose cybersecurity incidents. It's going to require fund managers to actually have board oversight and have a cybersecurity plan. And it's going to require them to follow the 5 key principles of cybersecurity and make sure that any funds the fund managers and any investments they're making, that they're doing some due diligence and assessments of those companies before investing the dollars. And chances are it will pass. There's a high likelihood of that.
And just to be clear, when you disclose your cybersecurity incident, the next step is you'll be investigated.
Yep. And the disclosure has to be in within 48 hours of you identifying the incident. Now, question we always get is, how quickly can I identify this incident? Well, the only way to quickly identify incidents is if you have a good cybersecurity program and you've invested in tools and technologies that can help you identify those incidents.
Well, interestingly enough, from your experience, for the benefit of the audience, what exactly do you know when you're handling a cyber incident in 48 to 72 hours?
Not much.
Right.
Go ahead.
And my point is, by not knowing much, so you're all a customer, you use a particular app with like a healthcare company to credential, and you're a hospital, and all of a sudden they're down for 3 days, and they put the sign on their website that's saying, we're having a network outage. Usually when you see someone who's having a network outage, that is code for, we are having some kind of cyber incident. And so what's your reaction if you have silence from this company? It's what? Negative. And so my point is, when you don't have a program in place and now you're faced with this situation, you can handle the event and try to protect yourself from legal liability, but technically if you're not providing the service, you're in breach of contract. And if that goes on for several weeks and you start losing customers, you're not getting them back. And that's kind of another cost that people don't think about, because you can't just focus on your legal liability, because if you protect that but don't have a business to run because you've lost key customers, what have you accomplished?
You know, one of the things I've always, in the cybersecurity world, we have folks who look at things with a very gloom and doom eye, and it's not because they really care about it from that perspective only, it's because that's the way they have to look at it so they can prepare everybody else what potentially can happen, right? So when I'm talking to PE clients and I'm telling them, it's not all gloom and doom, you can protect yourself by doing some of the basic things. The issue runs into it's going back to the speed at which we want to close transactions, or we want to go to the next deal and the next deal and the next deal. And in the process, we forget that there are basic blocking and tackling things that we just missed, right? So cybersecurity is going back to, it's a business issue. It's not a point in time, oh, I did it today, I forget about it. That's not how you want to deal with this. You want to look at this and say, pre-diligence or pre-close in the diligence, what did I find? To Igor's point, did we have enough issues in there identified? And again, nobody's perfect, and I will tell you this, you will never get complete security. You want reasonable security to a point where you feel comfortable that you have enough control over it as a fund manager, as an investor or a PE firm, so that you can come up with a roadmap to help your target companies get to a point where they can self-sustain and protect themselves, right? But you don't stop there. It's a continuous cycle. And as a PE firm, you should be thinking about saying, if I've invested X amount of dollars, I want to make sure that my investment is protected equally, right? That I don't get any surprises later on, which is what ends up happening majority of the time. Because the target company has a technical debt and you have no idea what that technology debt is or technical debt is because you've not done a thorough diligence on it. And now the target company comes to you and say, you know what, we have a $2 million software license fine because we were using licenses that were expired. How are you going to react to that? Oh, where did this come from? The reason you didn't know is because you didn't have continuous monitoring on that. Right? So the point is, it's a journey. You can't stop at one point. You have to continuously evolve in the journey, keep monitoring, and then get better at it, right? I have clients, PE firms over the last 2 years have become so good at it that they've actually have cost of economics now and bargaining power across their portfolio companies with some of these security solutions. Including master cybersecurity insurance providers. They're talking to them and they're making sure that they're all on the same foundational security tools. They have the same master cybersecurity insurance provider. So they're actually leveraging that on the business side and saving some dollars.
How many of anyone in our audience had to go and renew the firm's cybersecurity policy?
How much fun was that?
How much was the increase? What percentage?
Our biggest increase was cybersecurity insurance. Really, that's this past year. I think
The percentage increase.
30% plus a narrowing of coverage.
My experience has been 30 to 50% with increased premiums, significant underwriting to the point where if you don't use MFA, you're uninsurable by 80% of the industry. In fact, I was in the middle of a ransomware engagement and the insurance company went off the grid and nobody knew why until we read in the paper they'd been ransomwared and paid $40 million to get their network back. Thank God we got their approval to pay the ransom before they went off the grid. But my point is, a lot of people have thought in the past that insurance was a viable way to transfer the risk, and obviously everybody in this room has probably worked with reps and warranties insurance. But now you have to be very careful about using reps and warranties insurance because is it going to cover the cyber risk? And if so, technically, what will it cover? A lot of them will carve it out. And then what will the cyber insurance cover? Because I'll give you a good example of this. How many of you have actually read the definition of what computer network is in your policy? Would it surprise you to learn that many of the policies, the definition excludes personal devices of the employee? So what happens if you have a breach that results from an employee who got their own computer to work at home because we had to pivot so quickly? What's the insurance company say? Are they going to be nice and cover you because out of the goodness of their heart, or what are they going to turn around and say? No coverage. P.S. Have a nice day.
Or you are no longer covered and the underwriters will come back and say, insurance has lapsed. They'll decline. I mean, we've got situations where in the recovery stage from an incident, the cybersecurity insurance company has come to the client and said, we're no longer doing business with you. You're no longer covered through our insurance. We've taken it back. We've canceled the insurance. So, you got 30%, 20%, 40%. You guys are lucky. We have clients who are not getting any underwriters to write a policy for them or any cybersecurity insurance providers willing to give insurance to them because of some of the reasons that Justin just mentioned. No MFA, no insurance. You told you'll get MFA in the next 6 months, but you decided not to spend those dollars. Guess what? No longer eligible for coverage. Sounds good.
I have a question that mainly I'm curious about. What role does training play in good cybersecurity hygiene? And who should get trained?
Very good question. Let's ask the audience.
Including portfolio companies?
How often?
What's the consequence if you're doing the training and you click on a simulated phish? What do you think the consequences are? The first time, the second time?
So right there, right? There should be, but are there, right? That's a basic question. That's a basic premise, right?
Or,
Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, or conversely, I apologize for interrupting, what incentives can you give to a department to get the phishing rate down really low or have incentives? So I've worked with some companies on creating not just the stick, because the stick in this doesn't tend to work, but what are some carrots that we can put out there so that people want to get trained? Because you know what? Most of the time when there are breaches, you know where you can trace it back to. It's us. And so training is really important, but some of the other questions around it is, well, how do you make it fun? How do you make it interesting? What incentives can you provide people to actually, want to do it and be consistent about it?
So we have a lot of smart people here, right? Everybody answered, everybody should get trained. Let me ask you a very difficult question. And actually, it's a very simple question with a difficult answer. How many of you or your firms actually provide security awareness training to every single employee in the portfolio companies? 1, 2, 3, that's it. I heard many saying everybody. So I know there are many of you in there, but that's the point. Humans are the weakest link because we are the most susceptible. And the reason for that is because we have emotions, right? We are not robots. If we were run by robots, trust me, our cybersecurity incident rates were much low. And there's actually a study right now that's happening in Harvard and MIT, and they may actually publish it, saying if ever the workforce has humanoids, cybersecurity incidents will go down, right? It's because we are humans, we have emotions, and depending on what's happening on what particular day in our lives, personally, professionally, that affects the way we think, right? So there are studies right now that are tying neuroscience impact and how people are thinking and emotion and empathy to how people click, right? So our awareness training that we do, some of it is cookie cutter, but some of it has to be more targeted to the audience, to the folks, to the employees, right? Make it fun. To Justin's point, it has to be fun, otherwise you're not going to be engaged, right? So the goal here is, the one lesson, if ever, to Igor's point, is what role training plays. I would say that plays the biggest role. You could have the best process, you could have the best tools and the best technology, but if your people aren't trained, all that investment is not going to make any difference to you, right? And that's the one question that everybody keeps asking me: what keeps security professionals or people like us in the industry up at night? It's not the next hack, it's the people. It's the inability of the people to understand, or the lack of awareness, situational awareness, I should say, at a particular point in time for folks to use the training that they've been provided, or their reflexes or their thought process to say, no, I'm not going to click on that link, no matter how many gift cards I'm going to get out of that, right? That's the point, and that's what keeps us up at night, because I can deploy the best security tools, but I cannot deploy a tool against human. There just isn't any.
I guess what one of our goals for our session today is to kind of have another opportunity to educate you about what this is and how it can be different, because I can just watch at the conference. I'm sure there's many of you who are trying to network, you're harried, you're getting a bunch of emails. It's just so easy to click on something that you shouldn't, because you're going in 4 different directions, because we're all under a lot of stuff to do. And I guess the thing I would suggest to you is, let me ask the audience a question. When you were growing up, did your parents use the seatbelt on their car, or did you? I really didn't. Well, what changed? Nowadays, when I get in a car, what's the first thing you think to do? You don't even think about it. You put your seatbelt on. Well, we had the Mothers Against Drunk Driving that put a big campaign to educate people that seatbelts could help save lives. And then we started to pass laws in every state, but we have seatbelts. In fact, we have regulations that make us ensconced in airbags in our car for safety. And so the question is, what can we do, or how do we educate people so that cybersecurity becomes literally the digital seatbelt of the 21st century?
And we can make it happen. Not tools, not technology. It's humans. We can make it happen.
Should we take questions?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Oh. I recently ran into an issue, and I don't know if you folks have thought about it or mentioned it, where a client was breached, and it turned out that we couldn't pay the ransom because the extortionist was on the specially designated nationals list, meaning it was illegal to make that payment. Have you talked about redundant systems or other ways to address that sort of a problem where you just can't make the payment and get your systems back?
I'll take that one. So just so everyone in the audience knows what's being talked about. So if you make a business decision to pay the ransom, the Office of Foreign Assets Control is the part of the Department of Treasury that deals with foreign policy. And so there's certain people that we cannot do business with, or you can get prosecuted by the government. And if you're on that list, their wallet or other, that's where the question is coming from. You are legally prohibited from paying it. Your insurance company will not let you pay it. And so to start to try to answer your question is, it used to be that if you had backups and you stress tested your backups, that would help you. But the latest iteration from a ransomware perspective is what's called double extortion ransomware. So what they do there is they get into your system, they do their reconnaissance, they exfiltrate the data, and then they encrypt your network, and then they basically put you into the Kobayashi Maru type of situation from Star Trek, where if you don't want to pay the ransom, they'll just download it on the dark web. Even if you pay the ransom, they still have the data. So in that instance, it makes the situation incredibly difficult. And it comes down to a business decision. So at least in that instance, if you have a backup, at least you'd have data to run your network, and you'll just face the consequences of the release on the dark web. But if you've been in other situations like I've been, where the whole network gets encrypted and the backups get encrypted and you have nothing, that's even worse. But that's kind of where we are, which is why we try to talk so much about taking these preventative measures, because if you're put into that situation and you have no backups, you're in a serious situation, and I can expect what people might do there. If it's literally between getting prosecuted and you have no company and no network, I think we all know what the choice will probably be.
Yeah, and just to add to it, right, from a technical solution, there is actually a solution how to prepare for a situation like this, right? I mean, how many of you remember tapes, backup tapes? Right, quite a few, right? So what if I told you that the industry is actually thinking about introducing the backup tapes again? Why? I mean, one of the advantages of backup tapes was it wasn't connected to your network. It was literally a tape library, right? That is actually what they are calling the off-site backup, right? Offline backup. It used to be off-site. You put the tapes, send it to SunGuard or Iron Mountain, and they would store it for you in a temperature controlled place. Now that same concept is happening with the offline backup, where, to Justin's point, cloud systems are all connected, the backups are all connected, but now you're going to go with a technical solution that says, I'm going to keep a copy of my backup, my entire environment, offline. Maybe it's a tape, or maybe it's a completely different disconnected solution. So there are systems out there, there are solutions out there, there are ways to mitigate that or prepare for it. But yeah, if you get into a situation where you have none of that, you're hard on a rock place, right? You're in a really bad place there, and it becomes a business decision.
Was there a question down here, down front? Yes, please.
I'm coming with the thing here. Just go.
Thanks. Hi. So I represent, as outside counsel, private equity funds of different sizes, from emerging to RIA. And I think the question ultimately is there a one-size-fits-all with respect to cyber programming and management, or where do you think the SEC will land on this?
If that's a question for me, I think the SEC has just two kind of different modes. One is you're a registered investment advisor or you're not. And then the SEC relies on the notion of policies and procedures and technologies being reasonably designed for your manager. And so if you're a smaller manager, your policies will likely be a lot lighter weight than if you're Blackstone. And in that way, the Commission creates flexibility for itself to regulate as they see fit. It's kind of an uncomfortable place to be if you're a manager, but in fact, they do this with every aspect of regulation and every aspect of the law. And that's why I think our recommendation to our clients would be just imagine yourself sitting across the table from an SEC examiner or an investigator saying, well, a breach happened. What your response will have to be, yes, a breach happened, but look at all these countermeasures we employed, and our policies were reasonably designed to prevent that kind of breach. But in many ways, I have a lot of empathy as someone who was at the Commission for 11 years. If an incident happens, by definition, there's some failure somewhere, and that's what the SEC will hang their hat on.
Yeah, but it's not a one-size-fits-all, right? So to answer your question, can you apply the same view of a cybersecurity incident in a large company versus in a small to mid-sized company? It's not the same lens, not the same view, right? So it's not going to be the same program either. It should be tied to your business. It should be tied to the objectives of your business and how you are essentially positioning your business, right? That's what you should be thinking about as an organization when you design your cybersecurity program. You know, it's an analogy that once my client used, you know what, I'm okay with a Honda. I don't need you to design me a Ferrari of a cybersecurity program, right? So it's the same analogy. You can have cars of all different budgets, all different types. It depends on what you as a business think is going to be the most valuable for you. And it's going to give you the most value for the dollars you're going to spend and give you the risk mitigation, risk management comfort as a business.
And just to step back a bit, there are actually not a lot of cybersecurity rules. There's, Regulation SID, which is focused on identity theft, and there's Regulation SP that's focused on PII. But in the end, the Commission will always default to what did you tell your investors you were going to do, and did you actually do it? That's going to be their first kind of investigative thrust. And then on the incidence response, their question is going to be like, did you fulfill your fiduciary duty to your clients by informing them that their data was breached? They really have no other hook. And even if these rules are passed, there is, this cyber rule really requires an annual review, but it doesn't really say what your procedures look like, that you even have to have reasonable procedures, but just understanding what you've said to your investors and what you're doing is probably the kind of the biggest bang for your buck from a regulatory perspective. Anyone else?
Any other questions? We'll happily hang out if there's other things you'd rather ask privately instead of publicly.
Great, I think that's it.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.